Anime power systems can be one of the most interesting things that a series has to offer, but not all of them are created equal. Oftentimes, animes will have more or less complex systems depending on the type of story that it's trying to tell, and it's not like there's anything wrong with that. However, if we're to look at some of these systems in a vacuum, well, that's a different story. Devils and Chainsaw Man, for example, make for some really interesting plot and art, but the system itself just isn't very complex. While something like Cursed Energy, however, is much more detail-oriented because the story demands it. Both of these systems are great and work in their respective universe, but I think that most people could agree that overall Cursed Energy is just a better system due to its well-defined nature. So going off that, today I'm going to try and rank and explain every major power system in anime, or at least try to anyways. But to actually give each of these systems a fair shot, there needs to be a solid grading rubric. So I devised a 30-point system that's split into 3 different categories. Depth, which is how complex and unique each system is. Structure, which is the system's rules and overall framework. And aura, which is simply how cool each system is. Also, while this video can totally be watched by itself, this is technically part 2 to my last video where I rank some really important systems as well. So if you like this one, then go ahead on over and check that one out later. I think that's enough preamble though, so let's dive right into our first system on this list, starting off with the one that I actually just mentioned, Chainsaw Man's Devils. In this series, there's a few different kinds of devil powers. One is the devil itself, next is the hybrid between a devil and a human, then there's the humans with devil contracts, and finally a fiend, which is a devil that has taken over a person's corpse. Hybrids are the most powerful as they can heal in a few different ways, either by consuming blood or having their trigger activated, which in Denji's case is the cord on his chest. These hybrids possess superhuman abilities depending on what devil they fuse with, often resulting in one's head changing shape along with their arms, although this can vary. Fiends are like lesser versions of hybrids as they're no longer human and rather just devils controlling corpses. And the amount of power that they can produce is much less than they would normally do in their true form. Humans with devil contracts, however, can have power that varies significantly depending on how much they're willing to offer to the devil. You could offer a pinky toe to the wolf devil and be able to create a small jaw to bite someone, but if you say offer your left arm, you could gain a massive full wolf monster to attack enemies. Devils themselves can also be very sporadic as they vary in strength depending on how feared they are. There isn't really much else to say about this system though. The designs in this series are really cool and the fights are peak, but overall the power system is one of the simplest aspects of Chainsaw Man. And for that reason, I'm gonna give Chainsaw Man's Devils a 3 out of 10 in depth, a 6 out of 10 in structure, and a 9 out of 10 in aura, bringing Devils to a total 18 out of 30. Another power system that I only knew a little bit about before making this video was Tao from Hell's Paradise. I had watched the first season a while back but kind of forgot most of it, but after doing some more research, the power system in this series is actually really fleshed out and well done. Like many other power systems, Tao is kind of a catch-all for life force or energy, however it goes much deeper than just that. Tao's core principle is different from many other animes though, as it's not about complete emotional power or pure focus, but rather its power system is the embodiment of the ancient Taoist principle known as the middle way, or in other words yin and yang. The middle way is a style of living where you don't give too much to the world as to leave yourself with nothing, but you don't take too much from the world as to hoard its greatness. It's the idea of living a perfectly balanced lifestyle, embracing both the good and the bad, the strengths and weaknesses, and masculinity and femininity, and through this, people can significantly increase their power. This Tao energy is created in a person's tendon, which is the area just under their navel and is responsible for circulating Tao throughout a person's body, and it's also a Tao user's weak point, so attacks here can be very fatal. Depending on a user's mastery over their Tao or their natural Tao affinity, a person can really do anything they want with their ability, almost like Nen. But instead of technical rule style abilities like in Hunter x Hunter, it's more focused on the natural use of substances and physical changes. Tao isn't just what makes up the life force of humans though, but it runs through every living and non-living thing on the planet. And that's why mastery over Tao makes someone so incredibly powerful. There's 5 different categories of Tao that work very similar to Pokemon strengths and weaknesses. There's wood, fire, earth, metal, and water. But from what I understand, these are more symbolic than actual elements. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but that's what I've seen from my research. But basically, depending on a user's natural Tao element, they may be far weaker or stronger to other Tao types, while a matchup between the users of the same type of Tao will ultimately come down to pure skill. If someone has, say for example, Fire Tao, which is right behind Earth Tao on the chart, the person with Fire Tao also has the ability to funnel their energy into the person with Earth Tao, not only refilling their Tao reserves if they're depleted, but also raising their overall mastery and power output. And if that same Fire person used their power on a Water Tao user which is 2 spaces away on the chart, they would effectively neutralize or do significant damage to that person's Tao. Think of Tao similar to Chakra, Cursed Energy, or Nen, as it's circulated through the body, and by gaining better control and mastery over that circulation, someone can effectively increase their skill. That's not the only way to increase Tao levels though, as there's also Doen, which is physical exercise to improve Tao circulation, Shuetsu, which is achieved through meditation and achieving a more balanced state, Shuten, which is specific control and regulation of Tao throughout the body's organs, and Bochujutsu, which is the physical and deep intimacy between 2 people who are opposites in most ways. Opposite people means opposing chi, not just gender, and by becoming fully intimate with that person and accommodating for what they prefer, it gives both parties a better understanding of each each other's Tao and therefore their own as well. There's also Flower Tao, which has the ability to grant immortality at the cost of losing one's thoughts in humanity. Although there are godlike creatures in the series who can pretty much use it just fine because they're almost emotionless, as they perfectly embody the middle way and are insanely powerful. And lastly, I should also mention that the use of Tao should try and be as efficient as possible, so good users of Tao will hardly expend any energy in their fights. But techniques like ninjutsu, which Gabimaru is famous for, burn through Tao at an insane rate, so they're very self-destructive techniques. With incredible mastery over Tao though, this life energy can be used to create all sorts of elemental attacks, increase one's own physical attributes, hide someone's presence, alter the environment in a way that mimics telekinesis, and even see the world without using one's eyes through Tao perception. The system really kind of allows for anything to be possible, and while I didn't think that I would have to write this much for the system, I feel like all this stuff needs to be mentioned since it's pretty important. So for complexity, the system is definitely up there, and for those reasons, I'm gonna give Tao a 9 out of 10 for depth, a 9 out of 10 for structure, and since all I've really seen is Gabimaru's flames and some other random abilities, a 6 out of 10 for aura. It's incredibly well designed and from my understanding a very in-depth system, and I'm sure if I watched and read some more, my aura rating might change a bit, but for now, I'm giving Tao a 24 out of 30 overall. The next system that I want to talk about is going to be a bit of a blast from the past, and that's the Kagune from Tokyo Ghoul. I'd watched a couple episodes of this series a while back, but not much more, and after reading more about this system, I've got mixed feelings. In Tokyo Ghoul, the people with power are aptly named ghouls, and on a basic level they all have increased physical stats, although this can vary from person to person. The thing that actually defines this anime's power system though are the extra parts on ghouls known as the Kagune. Kagune are strange formations that sprout out of a ghoul's back and are made up of these things called RC cells. These RC cells are stored in what's called a kakuho, which is an organ only found in ghouls. These kakuhos can also be harvested by the CCG and turned into weapons called kinkeis, which are kagunes that have been altered to form weapons based off the power of the original ghoul. Now as for the kagune itself, there are 4 distinct classes that a user can fall into, the first being the ukaku class. An ukaku kagune sprouts from a person's upper back and typically resembles feathers and wings, with this power being known for its speed, agility, and long-range capabilities by crystallizing their kagune and firing it. But its high levels of speed and burst damage also make this kagune extremely energy intensive and brittle. If an ukaku is in too long of a drawn-out battle, they'll be at a major disadvantage. Then there's the Kokaku class, which sprouts from a ghoul's shoulder blade. This Kagune has these really tight and heavily bound RC cells, making this Kagune great for defense like armors and shields, or large weapons like spears, swords, and hammers, although this increased power comes at a cost of lower move speed. Then there's the Renkaku class, which excels in regenerative abilities and brute force, so some good speed mixed in there. This Kagune sprouts these tentacle-like arms from a person's lower back, and while it's more balanced than the Ukaku and really good at close-range fights, its high maneuverability and water-like bond of its RC cells make the Renkaku very brittle as well, so it's a bit of a glass cannon. However, with the regenerative properties of this class, they can pretty much make up for that weakness to an extent. Then finally there's the Bikaku class, which sprouts even lower from a person's back like a tail, and it's the most balanced of all the Kagunes. It's generally a mid-range class with middle-of-the-road abilities in terms of attack potency, speed, and durability. There's also a few different individual abilities specific to certain Kagune, like electricity powers, cloning, shape-shifting, and much more. Plus there's also these things called Chimera ghouls, which can have multiple Kagune types on one body. Then finally, there's the strongest form of a ghoul known as their Kakuja, which is incredibly rare but can occur due to eating another ghoul. And this Kakuja generally enhances a user's pre-existing Kagune by altering it in some way and making it stronger or even coating an entire person's body in this Kakuja. Overall, Tokyo Ghoul's system has a pretty solid structure, but taking a look at the wiki, there's just tons of ghouls with specific Kagune abilities that aren't fully explained or don't have a comprehensive reason for why it's possible. Like some ghouls can detach part of their Kagunes and some just can't, and unless I'm missing something I'd only get if I watched the anime in full, there's not really a reason behind it. It seems like there's a solid foundation that would work if its complexity was improved on a bit just to make these unique abilities make a little more sense, but overall, the system is pretty good for what it is. So in total, I'm gonna give Kagune a 5 out of 10 for depth, a 6 out of 10 for structure, and a 5 out of 10 for aura. I'm sure some of y'all might have different opinions on that, but just based on everything I've read, Kagune seems like a pretty middle of the road system, although that could be totally fine for the anime that it's in. With that said, Kagunes are gonna get a total of 16 out of 30. Another system that I wanted to briefly mention was Undead Unluck's power system, but because the two main characters' powers are pretty much based on amputation and the other is all about PDA, it's not super YouTube friendly, so I'll try and keep it short and sweet. In this universe, Negators are people that have the power to negate a certain concept from existence. These negation abilities are usually created due to some traumatic event, and pretty much all of these powers have insane reality bending potential. These negation abilities are split into 2 different categories, self-targeting and external targeting. For example, as the Negator Undead, the main character Andy has insane regeneration abilities as a self-targeter due to his immortality, which lets him control blood and use regeneration-based attacks, like firing off his fingers at enemies as bullets. Everything he does to his body still hurts him though, it's just something he's gotten used to over time. Then there's someone like Shen, who's an external targeter and has the negation ability known as Untruth, which allows him to make someone do the opposite of whatever conscious decision they plan to do. In order to activate his ability though, he must always be subconsciously fond of his target, making him a very happy and bubbly figure. And he must also have his opponent in his field of vision at all times. There isn't much of a basis for how these powers operate though. The only consistent consistent rule is that a self-targeter can negate something about themselves, while an external targeter can negate something about other people or things. There's also these things known as artifacts, which have unique abilities as well, like Nyoikenko, which has the ability to contract and expand at will, or possibly the first artifact Apocalypse, who is a key figure for the entire plot of the series, as this thing is what creates the missions that the main characters must face. This power system doesn't really have much of a structure or set of rules, as it's not really supposed to, but the complexity of each ability is really cool to witness. So I'll be giving Negators a 7 out of 10 for depth, a 5 out of 10 for structure, and a 6 out of 10 for aura. It's nothing crazy when looked at in a vacuum, but it's definitely a very unique system that I haven't really seen before in any other anime, so Negators get an 18 out of 30. Alright, moving on to another really good system. I don't know this one super well, but it's very popular, so I'll try and do it justice, and that's of course Chakra from Naruto. I never really watched Naruto growing up, and I always just kind of figured Chakra was a general life force, and that's true to an extent. But it seems there's actually a lot more complexity and categories to this system than I initially thought. Chakra is made up of the fusion between one's physical and spiritual energy, and acts as the power source for all jutsu. Instead of being located in just one spot, Chakra flows through one's chakra pathway system, which is very similar to the cardiovascular system. Along these pathways exist the Tenketsu, which are 361 locations that guide and release chakra from a person's body, along with the 8 gates that limit and regulate one's chakra output, as if it was not limited, the chakra within one's body would be far too much to bear. By strengthening one's body and mind, a user can also increase the level of chakra reserves, although the clan that you're born into and your overall genetics heavily play a role in your chakra. Now when it comes to jutsu, which is the formation of chakra into abilities, there are many different forms that each person can specialize in, although there's often instances where a person has a natural affinity to a certain style. There's the elemental releases like water, fire, wind, lightning, and air, which can be used by pretty much everyone, but then there's also mixed elemental forms like wood release or lava release, which are genetic specific. There's also yin-yang release, which does things based on physical and mental techniques. You could summon beasts with chakra, or even lean fully into taijutsu in the 8 gates and throw straight hands. Obviously, there's also more common methods like using chakra to increase one's strength and speed, healing techniques, sensing other chakra, and all that other general power system stuff. Keki Genkai is another major part of the chakra system, as these abilities are genetic jutsu specific to certain clans, like the Uchiha's Sharingan or Hashirama's wood release. There's also the tail beast, like Naruto's 9 tails, that provide insane strength to the user and all other kinds of jutsu techniques specific to each group of people. It might not be as intricate as some of the other entries on this list, but overall, chakra and jutsu seem to be very well done with tons of versatility. And for that reason, I'm gonna give chakra a 9 out of 10 in depth, an 8 out of 10 in structure, and a 7 out of 10 in aura. From what I've heard, Naruto's power system has a few contradictions and weird power scaling situations across the anime, so it gets some points docked in structure for that. And it's definitely a classic staple with tons of fight scenes, but overall, I think that there's definitely other animes with better aura out there. But it does seem to be very complex and have some really cool moments, so overall Chakra gets a 24 out of 30 overall. Now on to our next one. This is a system that I'm sure y'all have been waiting for this entire video, and that's One Piece's. But the weird thing with One Piece is that there's actually more than just one power system. There's 3 main ones and secondary powers appearing through the series all the time. I know that science-based stuff is really important in the later chapters too, but honestly I'm still kind of working my way through the series, and overall it seems like science-based weaponry and enhancements covers a wide variety of stuff compared to the more understandable systems. So right now I'll just be referring to Haki, Devil Fruits, and Swords. Swords are the simplest, so I'll just start with them. The One Piece world is filled with a multitude of bladed weapons, but there's a select few known as the Meito with impressive properties. There's the graded blades that don't have a specific count as they're the lowest grade Meito, then there's the 50 skillful grade blades, 21 great grade blades, and 12 supreme grade blades. The higher up on the list that a blade is, the stronger it is as well. And by stronger, I mean that the overall strength and durability is raised, and oftentimes the very strong blades have the potential to boost a swordsman's armament haki, which I'll get into in a second. There's also what's known as the black blades, which are formed when a blade has gone through countless battles and achieved a black tint, which can significantly increase its resistance and cutting power, and it's implied that this is done through the use of armament haki, but it's still unconfirmed. These blades are very cool, but compared to the other systems in the series, they're definitely the least complex. Then there's Haki, which is an ability that anyone in the One Piece world can learn, which I think is just super cool. Compared to Devil Fruits that take away your ability to swim and honestly are quite rare as it is, Haki can be learned and mastered by anyone to become an insanely strong fighter, even without Devil Fruit powers. The way Haki is split up is separated into 3 different categories: Armament Haki, Observation Haki, and Conqueror's Haki. Armament Haki provides the ability to strengthen power and defense of one's body, which can be done all over the body all at once, but it's most often condensed into specific areas like limbs to control one's energy and efficiency. This haki can also be spread into weapons, as swordsmen will often coat their blades in this power. Then there's what's known as observation haki, which is like increasing one's senses, so being able to sense where someone is, what their next attack might be, and someone's true emotions and feelings. Finally, there's Conqueror's haki, and this one's a bit different because unlike the previous 2 who can be learned by anyone, Conqueror's is an ability that someone with exceptional will has to be born with. This power is essentially a major blast of aura that can knock out those who don't have enough power to withstand such a fierce aura, like when Luffy knocked out 50,000 people with his haki in Fishman Island. There's also advanced versions of each of these hakis though, as armament haki can be expanded off of a user's body and into the air to do damage without even touching someone, or going into whatever someone's trying to hit and damaging it from the inside. Advanced observation haki can even let people see short glimpses into the future, also known as foresight. Then there's advanced conqueror's haki, which is kind of just a catch-all for raw power, as the users with this ability can coat themselves with their weapons in this haki to unleash insanely powerful attacks at enemies. Honestly, I think that haki is probably my favorite part of the One Piece power system, even considering devil fruits, because the fact that anyone can learn this and become incredibly strong using the two main powers alone is something that I really appreciate. Now onto the devil fruits though, this is what I would consider to be the main power source of One Piece. Devil fruits are these rare substances that when eaten give a user supernatural abilities, although they lose their ability to swim and the ocean opposes their power. Only one person can eat a devil fruit though, so if someone tries to eat the same devil fruit after someone has already taken a bite of it, it won't do anything. Users can also only have one fruit's power though. There's a few different types of devil fruits though, with the main three being Paramecia, which allows for the most common power of controlling a substance or an idea, the Zoans, which can alter a user's body usually resembling some kind of animal or creature, then there's the Logia, which gives users control over a certain element and even the ability to become that element itself, making them completely invulnerable under normal circumstances. However, it goes even deeper into things like the ancient and mythical zones, which lets users turn into creatures from past and legend, and the artificial zones created through science. Each devil fruit has its own set of limitations and abilities, but compared to haki, the idea of devil fruits are pretty straightforward. Now there's also other powers in the universe like the Daos from Sky Island, the 6 powers from CP9, and stuff like Fishman Karate, but those are all far less important in the grand scheme of things. So if you couldn't already tell from how long this section is, One Piece power system is pretty good, and for that reason, I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10 in depth, a 7 out of 10 in structure, and a 9 out of 10 in aura. I wouldn't say One Piece is my favorite power system in terms of style or anything, but the way it's created is really well thought out. But there's definitely a few times in this series when the consistency kinda goes out the window. So overall, I'm gonna give this system a 25 out of 30. Next up is going to be the Trigger system from World Trigger, which isn't the most popular anime, but it definitely seems to have a pretty strong niche fanbase. In World Trigger, every living being has a power source called Tryon, which is produced from their Tryon gland, an invisible organ located next to their heart. Triggers, however, are different from a person's Tryon, as instead of some kind of magical technique, trigger holders are actually a science-based tool that allows someone to shape their Tryon into abilities. A trigger holder has these slots that a person can use to select different triggers like swords, guns, energy blasts, shields, grenades, etc. When a person activates their trigger, the real body transforms and gets stowed away in the trigger holder, and instead will gain a new combat body that can actually use triggers. This duplicate body is made of pure Tryon and gives fighters enhanced physical stats and generally can't be damaged much by normal means. The cool thing about these bodies is that they can fight hard and even completely break, but when that happens, the Tryon body just disappears and the person's real body will rematerialize. Certain members of an organization known as Border also have the ability to bail, which can send their body back to Border HQ when their Tryon body is about to break. A person's amount of Tryon and personality also affects what kind of fighter they'd be. Like those with naturally high amounts of Tryon and good physical stats will most likely be upfront fighters known as attackers, while those with more calculated minds and battle IQ might be the shooters. There's also the snipers and other mixed subclasses that a person can be, but all the classes really mean are what kind of trigger weapons or abilities a user will have active. Each person only has 8 trigger slots, so they have to pick and choose what abilities they want to use on the battlefield at any given moment. There's also these things known as the black triggers, which are infused with a person's soul, and that black trigger can only be used by someone that has another compatible soul, which honestly makes for some really interesting stuff and a cool way to mix things up a bit. My main issue with this power system is just kind of how Tryon levels are stagnant and can't really be improved. But overall, after doing more research on this video, I do think I like this system a bit more than when I did at the start. But trying to be as unbiased as possible, I think that'll give triggers a 6 out of 10 in depth, an 8 out of 10 in structure, and a 4 out of 10 in aura. It's definitely super different from most anime power systems, so it definitely gets some points in structure and depth there. But overall, it's just not that complicated outside of understanding how the triggers actually work. It seems the fights are honestly very fair and balanced from what I've heard, so structurally I wouldn't say that there's many issues, but just from watching the fight scenes, I'm just not very impressed by the look of the system. Everything is kind of just the same energy swords, energy blasts, or guns. And it's not like it looks bad or anything, there's just nothing really about it that makes it feel very distinct or interesting when it comes to visuals, so overall, triggers get an 18 out of 30 overall. Next up we have Alchemy from Fullmetal Alchemist, and spoiler alert, but this one's gonna get a pretty good score. Fullmetal Alchemist's entire concept is literally built on a well-defined power system, and it does a really good job at mixing elements of science with the otherworldly in a way that makes for a really interesting story. There's one more power system on this list that's more structured than Alchemy, but other than that, Alchemy is really the king of having a solid set of rules when it comes to anime power systems. Alchemy is based on a strict set of rules and regulations that all revolve around the transformation of matter. What I mean by this is that as long as something has the molecular components that can be transformed into something else, else, it can be done through alchemy, although there are many layers to this process. The first rule of alchemy, and the one that's hammered into the heads of anyone who's seen the show, is the law of equivalent exchange, which states that to create something of value, something of equal value must also be given up. This means that if I want to say transform my water bottle into a dagger, I could do it, but the mass and molecular makeup of the water bottle have to be the same as the dagger. You can change the way matter is structured and arranged with alchemy, but you can't alter the key components that make up something. However, alchemy isn't actually strictly science-based. Like when Ed and Alphonse tried to bring back their mother, they created something resembling a person, but this creation lacked the soul of their mother, which they didn't account for. Overall, this completely ruined the experiment, but the fact that they completed an alchemical reaction with incorrect scales meant that those scales had to be rebalanced through what's known as a rebound. A rebound occurs when a person visits the other dimension in the series where the truth resides, or in other words, God. Within this dimension, there's also a large set of doors known as the Gates of Truth that hold all information about alchemy behind them. Anyways, to balance out the scales, Truth will take something from a person to make up for that exchange, which in Ed's case was his leg. And in this process, Ed touched the Gate of Truth as well, which gave him incredible insight into the true nature of alchemy. Now, because that leg was taken by Truth and kept in a separate dimension, it might sound a bit confusing at first, but that missing leg is actually what lets Ed use alchemy without a transmutation circle. Every alchemist in the series has to use a transmutation circle as the basis of their alchemy, and depending on what a person is trying to transmute, their circle can look different. This is because there's 3 stages to alchemy which flow together through the circle. Recognition, which is understanding what someone is fully transmuting, deconstruction, which is disassembling the material itself, and reconstruction, which is reassembling the material in its new form. Because of this, there are also transmutation sequences, like the one on Scar's arm, as he only uses the disassembling step. But for the most part, many people do need circles, and the reason behind that is because the circle is essentially the connector between a person and Truth's dimension. Now, since Ed already had a physical link to the dimension through his leg, he doesn't actually need a circle. Onto how good someone can actually be with alchemy and what it can do though, well, there's a lot of options. To be good at alchemy, knowledge is obviously a very important part, but a person with a deeper connection to the Gate of Truth will automatically be better at alchemy. Or if someone destroys their Gate of Truth, they'll completely lose their ability to perform any alchemical reactions, regardless of if they have incredible knowledge of materials or not. The specific types of alchemy can vary all over the place though, from Colonel Mustang's signature flame alchemy to Ed's more creative applications of using his metal limbs or whatever's around him. There's really a plethora of options for how a user can use alchemy, but the rules that actually bind the system are incredibly strong and must be followed to a T to use them correctly. For those reasons, I'm going to give alchemy a 9 out of 10 in depth, a 10 out of 10 in structure, and a 6 out of 10 in aura. This system is incredibly well crafted, and the fights in Brotherhood are also really good, but it's kind of hard to give this system a higher aura ranking compared to some of the more other stylized animes on this list. So overall, out of 30, alchemy gets a solid 25. Last but certainly not least, we finally have Nen, Hunter x Hunter's power system, and in my opinion as well as many other anime fans, I would say it's the best. There are definitely other systems that I like more than Nen stylistically speaking, but in theory the vast majority of anime power systems can pretty much be recreated with Nen. If you don't already know, the reason why Nen is lauded as the best anime power system is because of its sheer versatility and deep intricate rules. Like many other animes, Nen is essentially an energy that flows through every living being, although only those who have a knowledge of its existence will actually understand how to train it and become stronger with it. With this energy, there are a multitude of things that someone can do with Nen in its base form. Take this chart for example that shows all the different ways how users can control their flow and output of Nen to do specific tasks. Enhancing one's defenses, concealing one's presence, strengthening one area to attack with increased power, and keeping a consistent flow of one's Nen are all things that are vital for a user to master to be skilled with their power. In its basic form, Nen is pretty much just a type of energy that can grant physical bonuses, but through specific training and creative applications, Nen goes so much further than that. The core concept of Nen is split up into 6 different categories consisting of enhancement, transmutation, conjuration, emission, manipulation, and specialization. Every Nen user will have a natural affinity to one of these categories, often based on their personality. However, the amazing thing about Nen is that it doesn't completely lock users out from the other categories too. If someone is an enhancer like Gon, they'll still have 80% power in emission and transmutation style abilities, and 60% in conjuration and manipulation. Although specialization is a bit of a wild card, so no one but specializers can do that. Although specialists do still get the perks of the other categories with their respective percentage drops. Pretty much the closer your Nen type is to another, the stronger your abilities are in that respective category as well. But what do these classes actually do, you might be asking? Well, starting with enhancement, which is the easiest, enhancers typically excel in strengthening pre-existing properties of themselves or other things if they so choose. This can be like increasing one's own physical strength, speed, and defense, but it could also be more specific like boosting one's eyesight and hearing, brain processing, or maybe a user wants to create bullets that are impossible to stop, so they enhance their shots to make them almost indestructible. A really notable enhancer is Chairman Netero, and he's a prime example of why this system is so great, because because even as an enhancer, he trained and learned how to use the other categories of nen as well to their max efficiency, eventually learning the incredible technique that you see on the screen that I won't even try pronouncing. If we flip back to the chart that I showed you earlier, these types of nen abilities are known as Hatsu, which is a projection and manipulation of one's own aura to form something greater than just the raw power of nen itself. Then there's transmuters, who can alter their aura to become something else. For example, Killua, who has a natural affinity to electricity resistance, so he created an aura of lightning to use for insane movement speed and attack prowess. Then there's also manipulation, which excels in controlling of objects like Morel, who can produce and manipulate smoke to form cloud soldiers in areas of dense fog. Conjuration, which can create strong objects and weapons like Kurapika's Judgment Chain. Emission, which is best for expelling one's aura like Razor did when he used large blasts of nen to hurl at his opponents. And finally, specialization, which is a complete wildcard, such as Krillow's ability who can copy and use other nen abilities. With these 6 categories, if we're not considering extra dimensional beings or powers granted through godlike figures, nen pretty much has the ability to reproduce the powers of most shonen animes. If you couldn't tell, nen was also a major inspiration for cursed energy, specifically binding vows, as nen also has something very similar. By imposing certain restrictions on oneself, a nen user can effectively increase their power depending on how severe the restriction is. Like Kurapika, who has a chain ready to pierce his heart at any moment if he uses his powers on anyone but the Phantom Troop, but in exchange for that, he gains a significant boost in power when fighting said Phantom Troop. But yeah, with all that said, nen kinda covers all bases. Someone could use emission and transmutation to expel fire from their feet like Shinra and Fire Force, or harden one's skin through enhancement like Armament Hockey. For the majority of powers out there, nen has a way to recreate it within its system, provided that a user actually trains incredibly hard and has the willpower to produce these abilities, of course. There's plenty more specific details that I could go into about nen because it's so great, but that's all you really need to know for this system. So overall, I'm gonna give nen a 10 out of 10 in depth, a 10 out of 10 in structure, and a 10 out of 10 in aura. Do I think that there's animes out there with better fights and technically more style and aura than nen? Absolutely. Hunter x Hunter isn't my favorite anime after all. However, because this system literally has the ability to create anything and everything that most other power systems can do, it has the potential to be as great as literally any other power system in that category. So overall, nen gets a perfect 30 out of 30 in my book. Realistically speaking, I'd rather give it an 8 or 9 out of 10 in aura, to be honest, just based on what we've actually seen in the show and not just what's technically possible, but it also just feels so wrong to give nen anything other than a perfect score. And that's all I've got for y'all today. I really did want to mention the systems of Soul Eater and Fate as well, but since I haven't seen those shows, I really tried my best to do some research, but it seems like I'd really only understand the systems if I actually watch the animes in full, which I really just don't have the time for right now. And those systems seem incredibly tied into the world and story, so I think I'd be doing them a disservice if I tried to sum them up without actually watching the show. With that said though, I hope y'all enjoyed this video, and I'll leave a link in the description if y'all want to join the Discord. And if you want to see more videos in the future, then make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a like on this video. I plan to do more deep dive analysis type video essays soon, which I'm really excited for, so stick around for those. Anyways, that's enough yapping from me though, so I hope y'all have a great rest of your day, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace!